Hi, I'm Amy Cornell, and I'm your Texas broker for Front Real Estate. Wanted to talk to you today about how to real estate better through the inspection process. So this is a little bit longer video than I normally do because the inspection process is a really big deal. It takes a while. It's a very kind of emotional time for the buyers. They're just not sure what to expect. And so really spending some extra time with your buyers here to make sure that they are comfortable and confident with the information that is presented to them is really key. So I wanted to pop over to a PowerPoint so that I could go over a few things with you that I've got written down just to help me remember. And so let's start with, what I always start the buyers with is that, hey, the inspection is comprehensive. They are going to check everything, right? They're going to check the light switches, and they're going to check the plugs, and they're going to check the chimney, and they're going to check the plumbing, they're going to check the roof, they're going to check all these things. But it is not that they are going to find absolutely everything that is happening with that house, because they cannot see what is happening below the slab. So, unless it's pier and beam, then they can see it. But if it's a concrete slab, they can't see what is happening to that plumbing down there. And they also can't see what's happening behind drywall. So they can use techniques like infrared and those kind of things, and that is great. But ultimately, there are some gaps in what the inspection can provide. I also remind people that an inspector is trained to know a lot about a lot of things, but he is not a specialist in really anything. And so if it comes down to a electric panel or something like that, they are going to report back what they have been told in their continuing education and their classes, just like we as realtors have been advised of different things. But an actual professional in that field may be able to get better information to that buyer than what that general truck inspector can. And so sometimes we start with that general truck inspector, and those are going to be your guys that you meet, the board of realtors, or that you get marketed to, that are licensed with truck to provide a general truck inspection. I'm going to show that to you in just a minute. But just know they are trying to do everything they can right, but there are some limitations on what they can do as well. And then I also just prepare my buyers too that, hey, you are paying these guys to go and find as much wrong with the house as possible. The goal is not here to have just a really thin, clean report and, oh, the house is perfect. Because that's unrealistic, right? Even a brand new house, when we do an inspection on it, there's things that are just anomalies about that house, kind of weird. Hey, they did the best they could, but this is always going to be an issue, whatever. There are going to be things like that on any inspection. And so just knowing from the beginning, hey, buyer, that is not the goal. The goal is not to have every single thing on this report remediated. The goal is not to have it come in as completely clean. There is absolutely no way that would happen. What we are trying to do is find out what is specific about this house that are issues, or that are just known things that are considered defects, even though it's just anything outside of the norm, right? We got to know what those are and be comfortable with them and say, hey, you know what? I get it. I get that that's the way that it is, and I'm still going to go forward. I tend to remind my buyers and say, I want you to think about the house that you're living in now. I want you to think about your parents' house. I want you to think about your grandparents' house. When you walked through that house, was there a light switch that didn't work? Was there one that y'all just didn't press because you knew that one didn't work? There's weird stuff about every house. There's things. And so don't have this expectation of perfection. Have an expectation of, we want to make sure that the house is safe and secure. Okay, we don't want to have things that, like a gas leak. We want to really make sure that, if we light a fire in the fireplace, that it's not going to cause problems. Those are the things that we're really looking for to make sure that the house is okay. And that's really what the inspector is going to be focused in on as well. Okay, so normally the inspection lasts around 3 hours, and I'm saying around because it just depends, right? It depends on how big that house is, what, if they have a pool, did they order an additional termite inspection, what all did they order? So it's a little bit different for everybody. Just talk with your inspector about how long he thinks it will take and what time that you and the client should get there. I really, really recommend that the client not be there for the entire inspection. It is very difficult for an inspector to have, capacity to handle all of the inspecting things that he's supposed to do while he is answering a peppering of questions from the buyer, or even just while the buyer is in the space. Really, both the buyer and seller should be gone from the house during the inspection, and really let that inspector dig through. Let him see what is going on with the house. And he's going to need a couple of hours at least to do that really on his own. So I really insist for my buyers, like, please don't be there. It's only going to hurt you and hurt the integrity of the report for you to be standing there over his shoulder the whole time. Let him really get a good look, but then schedule a time of, hey, I'm going to be here at this time, and that's when I want to have more of that final walkthrough with the inspector where he can point out any issues that he found. So at that final time, usually if it's a 3-hour process, so about 2.5 hours in, I'm going to arrive with the client and do just that final walkthrough. That's going to give the inspector time to show us things that he talked about on the report. He's often going to be able to help temper the comments that were on the report. So maybe on the report it says that there is no arc fault, something on the electric panel. It's a very common thing to come on the report, but he can't really say, hey, this is really common, and so it's not that big a deal on his report. He has to report it as a deficiency on the report. But in that 30-minute walkthrough, he could say something like, hey, we see this on every house until they upgrade to a new electric panel. This is how it is. It's on, 90% of the homes in this area. So, yes, it is a deficiency and you could change it out, but it's also not necessarily something that has to be done immediately. Those are the kind of comments that I want to get to the client in that last 30 minutes. And so it is helpful for them to come and do that final walkthrough on site with them. I will tell you, I'm also looking for in an inspector, that they have kind of a bedside manner that will help the client understand the severity of the issue, but that also, if it is a non-severe issue, that won't be an alarmist about those things too. Okay, so we're going to have that last walkthrough. It is still going to be a jarring time for that buyer. Even though you've got somebody that is kind of softening some of it, it's just jarring. It's kind of like you're about to marry your husband or something, and you have, you get a police report on him or something that says, oh my gosh, there were all these other things. I don't know. It's crazy because you are paying somebody to tell you all the things wrong so that you know about them up front, and it just is hard for a buyer to see. So we go through that 30 minutes and I tell them, okay, now we know. We kind of know what the situation is. I don't want you to make any rash decision one way or the other. We've got a little bit of time. What I'm going to do is, as soon as that report is released, which most of our inspectors will release it immediately after that, as soon as the report hits my email, I'm going to take some time, go through it, and I'm going to create you a list. I'm going to create a list in 3 parts. One is going to be items that I think we should ask the seller to help us with related to safety and security. The section 2 are going to be things that are more items that could be done as a honey-do list after closing. So there are things that y'all probably have already thought about, like, hey, we're probably going to have to do those ourselves after closing. And then 3, that's going to be things that are on the report, but they are just kind of are the way they are. They're not necessarily things that need to be taken into account right now. It's things that we just need to plan for in the future that may be an issue. That would be something like maybe a tree is planted close to the foundation. Well, that tree might have been there for 50 years and it'll probably be there another 50 years, but it's going to come up as a deficiency on the inspection report. And so I don't want you to go and cut down that tree because, man, it provides great shade and it is really a good thing for the house until it becomes a problem. And so we just need to watch it. I'm going to have all of those things on that list. I'm going to send it to you, and then we're going to schedule a time to go over those together on the phone. So just like when we were preparing the offer, I want y'all to really spend some time thinking about it. I want you to look at my comments, read through the report, and then read through my comments, and then you can move those things around on that list. So if you say, hey, Amy, that may be a honey-do item for some person, but I really want the seller to fix it. I don't want to do it. Okay, let's move it up. You may also see some things on my seller list that you're like, oh, that's really not a big deal. I don't want to nickel and dime them. I can do that as part of the honey-do list. Totally okay. So whatever that is, you're going to help me move those around. We're going to have that final list after our phone call, and then I'm going to prepare an amendment to send over to the seller with that to say, hey, seller, we really are still liking your house, but we need this done in order for us to go forward. And that could be either actual repairs or that could be money. So it just depends on how this all shakes out, on which direction we want to go, but we could do it either way. And then we're going to just have a negotiation with that other side. What I would like from you, buyer, is permission to share with them this full inspection report. Just let me click over and show you that now. So here is an example. Oh, it's kind of small. Hold on. Get it on this screen. There you go. So this is an example. So you can see this is 39 pages that was prepared. And it's going to have a lot of pages and then a lot of more CYA. So it's going to say a lot of notices. These are not things that the inspector wrote in individually. It's going to have maybe some maps of the house. It's going to have some pictures and some diagrams. It's going to have a lot of information on the house. And so I'm going to say to my buyer, I would like for you to allow me to share this full inspection report with the seller, so that when we send over our request, he can also see all the things that we're not asking for. So I think he's going to have a better chance of actually fixing the things that we are asking for, because we are going to be so reasonable in our request to him and really only going after those safety and security issues. We're not going to be looking for things that are cosmetic, anything like that. We're really looking for those bigger issues. And so I would encourage you to allow me to release this to them, because I think it'll put you in a better competitive position. Most of the time the buyer will accommodate that. I will tell you, some agents don't love that's the process that I do. I'm a fiduciary for the buyer at this point, and to me, to put the buyer in the best negotiating position, I need to go ahead and alert the seller of all those issues. Here's why the seller's agents don't like me on that, is because once I divulge that full inspection report to them, then if for some reason we don't go forward with the transaction, then really the seller needs to modify their seller's disclosure to include all items related on that inspection report. And really, best practice is to include that inspection report with the seller's disclosure going forward. Some sellers, are like, well, I don't believe that all those things were wrong about my house. I think that's bad form, whatever. Okay, that's fine. But I do think it does help from a fiduciary perspective when I'm looking at how can I best serve my buyer. I think it helps. And so that's part of why that's my process. Okay, so we're going to get that whole report. I'm going to ask the listing agent any questions. So I think some agents are afraid to do that. Like maybe there's a random stain on the ceiling of the garage and you're just not sure what that came from. Go ahead and ask the listing agent to ask the seller for you. That would help you prepare that document to go through. So while we're talking about that document, let me show you an example of one that I've done. So this is an example of what I call my inspection analysis with the things that we want the seller to fix, the honeydew items, and then just is the way that it is. And so I go through this whole report. And so I'm going to pop back over to that. And so I'm going to go through this whole report, and I'm going to take out the things that are happening on them, and I'm just going to distill them down to more of the simple words so that it's not so much to look at, so that we can actually have a list. And so that's where I'm going to come up with a list like this. When I am writing the list like this, I want to be very clear in my language. I don't want to be too flowery, but I also don't want to be too vague. I don't want to just say sink is leaking. I want to say things like repair or replace kitchen faucet to address leak. Something like that, that is saying what I actually want the buyer, or what I actually want the seller to do. So I want them to repair or replace that sink faucet. I don't want, I don't want even just the and so maybe I want a specific vendor to do something like that. So like maybe if I'm getting the roof, if I want the roof totally replaced, I might want to include an invoice from the provider that I want to do that, and say, per attached exhibit A, have RJ Construction re-roof the home using similar materials, or using materials called for on attached invoice. Okay, something like that. So as clear as you can be is very good at this point. I will tell you one of the things that I got hurt on at one point, and this was me as a novice agent. acting for myself, which, maybe I had a fool for a client. But I had put into a repair amendment for a house that we were buying, and I had said replace HVAC. Well, I had not said replace HVAC with new HVAC. And so they replaced it with an old HVAC unit that was working. So they met the terms of that repair amendment. They also, in that same transaction, I wanted to have some glass doors put onto a bathroom. And so in my head, right, I had these gorgeous frameless glass doors that they were going to be so pretty, and, just had that. But I didn't include any pictures. I didn't include any product numbers. I didn't do any of that. I just put on the amendment, add glass doors to shower. Well, sure enough, we go through for a final walkthrough, and those glass doors were in there, and they were the cheapest looking sliding glass, gross, chrome finish. It was terrible looking doors. But it was on me because I wasn't ultra specific in what I was asking for from the seller. So I would encourage you, when you're writing this up, I would go ahead and start at this point writing very specific what you want that seller to do. The honeydew items and the is what it is, that's a little less important because that's you're just kind of saying. But I want to go ahead and start really writing with specificity on what I want the seller to do on that, because ultimately, and this is another example, this is what is going to come from it. I'm going to have an amendment that specifies out exactly what I want them to do on here. And then what I want that to do. I can either, in the state of Texas, write it up on an amendment like this and have it all detailed out and all fit in here. Or I could have also said, just on that paragraph 2, I could say, see attached exhibit A, and then I could attach an exhibit A like this is. Okay, so there are different ways that you can go about doing that. The other thing that we haven't talked about yet too, but is that we could consider not asking for all of those things to be done on that seller's item and accept an amount in lieu of repairs. So if we are accepting an amount in lieu of repairs, what the lender, well, if the buyer is getting a loan, the lender does not want to see an accommodation for an amount in lieu of repairs on an amendment, because they don't want to think that the house is deficient, right? The lender is not getting a copy of this inspection report. Absolutely not. They don't, this is not theirs. This is between you and the seller potentially, but it's a work product document for the buyer. But if there is a negotiation and y'all decide, hey, you know what, it's really just easier for us to trade cash, because that way then you, buyer, can go ahead and get that done. You'll have the warranty on it. You'll know exactly what provider does it. I love this. I love the amount in lieu of repairs. It has to be on the settlement statement because in order to be RESPA compliant. But what is most often used is that paragraph 12A1B, or the amount that where the seller pays a portion of the buyer's closing costs. So if you have not had the seller pay any of the buyer's closing costs yet, you can ask for some money here, and then it really is the same net effect as the seller giving the buyer some cash for an amount in lieu of repairs. But it's never called that, okay? It's always going to be this amount right here where it says in number 4, the amount in paragraph 12A1B is changed to, and so you would put your $2,000 in there, and then $2,000 would be moved over at closing from the seller to the buyer, reducing the amount that the buyer has to pay towards their closing costs, thus giving them money in their pocket to fix whatever that needed to have happen. Now, if you have already use the maximum amount that the lender will allow with like the seller paying closing costs on your behalf or some other sort of accommodation, then you may not be able to do this and the actual repair needs to get done. That's okay too. So if the actual repair is getting done, make sure that the seller is having a licensed professional do that. You do not have to write that in. It is already as part of the contract is that the seller is agreeing to have a licensed professional do that. So you're good on that, but you want to make sure that you're getting all of the receipts and invoices, receipts, whatever, from the seller so that the buyer has those for his file, and then confirm that through that final walkthrough. You may not actually see all of that until the week of closing, and that's totally normal. But know that if the seller signed off on this, then they are getting those done. All right, so just to clarify, so we're going to send the email to the buyer with that list of 3. We're going to get their feedback on the phone. They're going to agree to it. Then we're going to prepare the amendment. I get it signed by my client, the buyer, and then send it over to the listing agent, usually with that inspection report. And then again, that's another time for me to kind of sell via email of, hey, we really love it, but we need this, this, and this done in order to go forward. And then we're going to wait for that response. This all has to be buttoned up by the end of the option period, right? And so if you're keeping in mind that your option period ends at 5 o'clock on whatever that last day is, you can't extend it an hour. You can't do anything like that. It ends at 5 o'clock. Now you can't add a whole nother day or something if you get an amendment signed by both party and tender consideration for that. So it needs to be at least $1 changes hands to get an extension. But what we're really looking for is before 5 o'clock on the last day of option, everybody's got to be in agreement. So if you've got, if you have not heard back from the listing agent about that, you need to be on the phone with them. Starting probably at noon that day, you really need to be kind of wearing them out on the phone of what is your seller going to do? What is your seller going to do? And your buyer probably needs to make a decision by about 3 o'clock in the afternoon of how long are they going to let this go? Are they going to let it go all the way up until 4:45? Are they going to let it go? Do they want to go ahead and make a decision now? And what their decision needs to be is, are they going to terminate because the seller is not going to do this, or are they going to go forward knowing that they're getting the house as is? The seller does not have to respond to your repair request, okay? They do not have to respond, and you could assume that they have a backup offer on this. We don't know, okay? So you really do have to figure out how important is this to the buyer, and how much are they going to make a determination, if they're going to go forward or not, and at what time. Okay, so all of that is happening. That like I said, it's a kind of emotional time. It's a time that you want to make sure you don't miss it. You don't, oh my gosh, it's 5:15. No, that's not okay. I'll tell you, for us, we set alarms on our phone. As soon as we go under contract, we set alarms for, hey, the option is 24 hours away from expiring. And then that morning, I think there's an alarm that goes off at 8, and one at noon, and one at 3, to make sure that we don't miss that 5 o'clock deadline on the option. Because if it does go past, really, the buyer has accepted that home as is. They know all about it from the inspection, but they have accepted it. All right. A couple of other things. HVAC service. So if the buyer is getting a home warranty, one of the things that the home warranties like to see is that the HVAC was working appropriately at time of closing, or at some time in between when you contracted for the home and not. And so they will take your inspection report that says, yes, everything is totally fine, if there is an issue with the HVAC after closing. However, what we see probably 90% of the time is that the HVACs are marked as deficient for some reason. If that is the case, then really having an HVAC service to that list of repairs is really important to make sure that your buyer has full coverage on the home warranty going forward. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. And then all the rest of it we've already talked about on here. So I think we're good on that. And we already looked at these. We talked about the amount in lieu of repairs. So really, you are ready to go out and negotiate this repair amendment. Y'all, I get it's a lot. This feels like, oh my gosh, am I ready? Am I not? Don't be afraid to reach out to other agents. Don't be afraid to talk about, what is kind of customary, what's not. But use your best guess, right? A lot of this is about, hey, is a fireplace situation, is that a safety concern, those kind of things. You've got a pretty good idea of it, but don't be afraid to bring in other people in your office or your broker to really help you do that. If I can help you with anything too, just feel free to reach out. Look forward to helping you real estate better. Thanks.